I'm going to take a couple of minutes to give you some background information. Late last year, legislation was drafted by Senator Van Hollen and Congressman John Sarbanes to establish a Chesapeake National Recreation Area in order to, well, it includes the Whitehall Estate, which is one of a package of 4 total sites, and establish them as a flagship member and a gateway site. Unfortunately, our elected officials did not inform nor consult any of our local Broadneck community leaders, nor any residents of the communities on this peninsula. Holly Beach Farm was the first site named that upon further research was eliminated. The next named site was and is Whitehall Estate. The role of Whitehall as a gateway site for public tours requiring use of the 1-mile-long Whitehall Public Road was disturbing to Broadneck residents, especially to those who live on Whitehall Road. Summer beach traffic consumes our highway and service roads, many of us, and keeps many of us from reaching our homes on these beach weekends. Consultants' reports forecast an increase in this traffic for years to come. The relief expected by constructing a third Bay Bridge span will not be a reality for at least 15 to 20 years, as the NEPA 2 bridge planning study will not conclude until at least 2025, and then years to construct and plan the new span. Now facing the return of expanded tourist operations at Whitehall, although they have plans in place, which is what the National Park Service will discuss with us, to limit the crowds of visitors by involving the National Park Service on site operations and managing the plans. The public is very concerned and seeking answers to many questions. To just acquaint those of you who don't know a lot about Whitehall, Whitehall is the first historic home that was named in Maryland, and is lovely and hopefully will be preserved for future generations. That's the purpose of this call, to see if we can enlighten each other and come to a conclusion that satisfies both our Whitehall residents as well as preserve Whitehall Manor. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Charlie Scarlett for his comments, and then Charlie will introduce Wendy O'Sullivan. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Good morning, everybody. I see a few familiar, friendly faces on there, and I'm glad to see everybody. I think as this is actually the second neighborhood meeting that we've had. The first one we had back in April, which was attended, and I went into a lot of detail at that meeting, which I won't go into today. But the short version of it is, you know, as Pat said, I'm Charlie Scarlett. I am president of the board of the Brandywine Foundation, which currently owns Whitehall. It's been in my family since 1946. I was born there in 1952, and so I've been on Whitehall, been at the end of Whitehall Road for a long time. Love the area, love the community, and love everything about it. Whitehall, as Pat pointed out, is the oldest national landmark in Maryland. It has a rich history, and a lot of that history is yet unearthed. You know, we're doing a lot of studies there at this point to kind of find out what we don't know, and it goes way back to the 1600s and prior. Also very important to Annapolis, because the people who lived at Whitehall and built Whitehall are the same people that built Annapolis. So it's very important in our area. The Brandywine Foundation inherited Whitehall when my parents passed away, and we've been running it since then. We've been working hard to make it sustainable. As I think most of you know, we operate as a wedding venue. We operate a small horse boarding operation and a small B&B. That gets us enough revenue to kind of keep the place operating on an annual basis. It does not get us enough money to do any sort of capital improvements, roof repairs, preservation studies, anything beyond that. So we've been looking at grants and partnerships and opportunities to help us with manpower and money to enable us to do what we need to do to basically. Our goal is to preserve Whitehall, to interpret Whitehall, and to share Whitehall with the public on a limited basis. I'll say that right off the bat. As a person who grew up there where nobody came to visit, I certainly don't want the place overrun with traffic or visitors or anything else. And everything that we have discussed amongst ourselves, and I think Wendy and her team will emphasize that today, is focused on limited visitation in the future. We're very, very aware of the traffic concerns on Whitehall Road. I've experienced them for my entire life and fully empathize with everyone who has concerns. And we're doing our best to minimize that, and at the same time, preserve, interpret, and share Whitehall. Today, the purpose really is, and Wendy graciously agreed to come and speak with our neighbors to kind of answer questions about the Chesapeake Gateways program. Whitehall has applied to become a Chesapeake Gateway site. And she graciously funded the Volpe rapid assessment study that I think most of you have seen, which pretty much underlines exactly what we're talking about doing there. And Wendy and the team from Volpe are here today to answer questions about the Chesapeake Gateway site program and the Volpe report. I'll say again that the CNRA, the Chesapeake National Recreation Area, that's got everybody concerned, is not a part of this discussion today, because until the legislation passes, the National Park Service really has nothing to do with the CNRA and really has no position on it. But we are all aware of it. So I'm delighted to welcome Wendy and her team today. Senator Sarah Elfreth introduced us several years ago as a result of a conversation on the lawn at Whitehall. And I'm very excited about the partnership and looking forward to kind of what develops. We have nothing is etched in stone at this point. We haven't negotiated anything. We haven't really discussed anything in great detail. We're just kind of seeing what comes along. And of course, the CNRA legislation will have a big impact on kind of the outcome of it all. But in any event, I'm looking forward to hearing Wendy and Katie's presentations today, and we'll have questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Wendy. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Pat. Hello, all. I'm Wendy O'Sullivan, Superintendent of the NPS Chesapeake Gateways Community Assistance Program. We're based here in Annapolis, Maryland. With me are a few members of the NPS Chesapeake Gateways team: Bob Campbell, Chesapeake Gateways Planning Manager; Eddie Gonzalez, Chesapeake Gateways Director of Partnerships and Grants; and Brent Everett, our Chesapeake Gateways Acting Director of Communications and Visitor Experience. Also, we have our partners with us from the Department of Transportation's Volpe Center: Katie Lamoureux, Dan Mannheim, Emily Makachak, and Anthony Jones. So as Charlie was saying, I do want to clarify a few things. The federal team that's here, we only have an hour set aside for this session. I'm sorry that there was a mix-up, but we actually have something right at 11:30. So we'll make sure we get through our overview and leave times for Q&A within that block. Also, before we start, I want to just reiterate what Charlie just shared and clarify. The focus of this session is to share the recent rapid access assessment of Whitehall conducted by the DOT's Volpe Center as technical assistance to the Brandywine Foundation under what's known as the Chesapeake Gateways Community Assistance Program. I know that there is confusion out there over the difference between the congressional proposal for a new Chesapeake National Recreation Area and the very long-standing NPS Chesapeake Gateways Community Assistance Program. The NPS and the DOT team will not be discussing nor commenting on the congressional proposal to establish a Chesapeake National Recreation Area. The CNRA proposal is not an NPS-driven initiative, and it's the policy of the National Park Service to not comment on pending legislation until it's introduced and the NPS is asked to testify before Congress. So the reality is we're waiting to see the final legislation just along with everyone else.
Have you not been involved in any of the process and communicate? I mean, I find it impossible that you haven't been active and involved,
There is
if not unprecedented. And I say that with a host of experience in the area.
There is a very formal process where the legislative branch can ask for what's called technical assistance, drafting services from the administration branch. So yes, the Park Service provided under that very formal process, drafting services for Senator Van Hollen, but that is a very formal process, and it does not mean or indicate that the Park Service had a position or was driving the proposal itself. So that's the distinction. So I'm going to keep rolling here, and to say that we're here today to share the report that was conducted as community technical assistance to the Brandywine Foundation under the Chesapeake Gateways program. The report was not associated with the CNRA, and the issuance of the report concluded the NPS Chesapeake Gateways and Volpe assistance to Whitehall. So to be clear, the NPS Chesapeake Gateways program is not in negotiations, nor are we engaged in any other projects or planning for the future of the site. So what we're here today is to share the findings from the rapid assessment. And so we'll start with that, and I'll pass it to Katie Lamoureux from the Volpe team to pull up the presentation. We'd appreciate the ability for Volpe and the Park Service to run through the presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions about the report.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Lamoureux. Can you see my screen by any chance? You can. Okay, yes. Great. We've been using Microsoft Teams and haven't used Zoom in a while, so I just wanted to make sure. So my name is Katie Lamoureux. As Wendy said, I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation Volpe Center. I've been at Volpe for about 9 years. I'm a transportation planner, have about almost 20 years now of planning experience in environment, recreation, transportation planning, with a focus on public lands transportation planning. So I will go ahead and kick off the slide deck here. So just as a reminder, here's our agenda for today. We already had the welcome and introductions. Wendy already introduced the Chesapeake Gateways program. We will just give you a very brief snapshot of who we are at the US DOT Volpe Center, just to provide that context, and then spend most of the time talking about the study that Wendy and Charlie just referenced, and kind of go over what's in the report and the findings from that study, and leave time for Q&A at the end. And Wendy, did you want to highlight anything here?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So,
yep.
So to further try to clarify the difference, kind of really explain who the NPS Chesapeake Gateways Community Assistance Office is, we always start by sharing the map of the full Chesapeake watershed, because this is really the scale and scope of where we work and what we support. The watershed, the lands and the rivers that drain to the Chesapeake Bay, run from Cooperstown, New York, in upstate New York down through the Virginia Tidewaters. It includes portions of New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, almost all of Maryland, a majority of Virginia, and all of DC. The 41 million acre Chesapeake Bay watershed is home to 18 million people, and the bay and its rivers still influence and inspire our culture, our economy, and our outdoor pursuits. And so really simply put, the Chesapeake is the origin and remains a vital part of the American experience. And Congress acknowledged that in 1998 by an act of Congress. They created what is known as the Chesapeake Gateways and Water Trails Program. We refer to it as Chesapeake Gateways for short. They established a community assistance program and a partnership network of the National Park Service to help protect, connect, conserve, restore, and interpret the natural, cultural, historical, and recreational resources of the Chesapeake watershed, of the full watershed. So to be clear, we are not a national park nor any other NPS park designation. The NPS Chesapeake Gateways office is a multi-region support and grant-making office that has provided over $30 million over the past 25 years to community partners to connect people to their waterways, to their landscapes, to rich heritage and diverse stories, with the aim of providing authentic Chesapeake experiences and to grow a stewardship ethic for the Bay. The Chesapeake Gateways Network includes partner sites such as state parks and wildlife refuges, national parks, maritime museums, historic sites, heritage areas, water access sites, and many other places that have an authentic connection to the Chesapeake and the Chesapeake watershed. The NPS Chesapeake Gateways office does not own, operate, or manage any of the sites within the Chesapeake Gateways network. As a community assistance program and partnership network, we offer a range of support, competitive grants, financial assistance, workshops, and annual training events. We do online networking and webinar for partners. We have a vibrant website with content, and we do communications and branding. And we also provide technical assistance to partners and community organizations. I'll ask someone from our team if they could please post a link to our program management page where you can learn more and read the Chesapeake Gateways framework document that gives the background and structure on Chesapeake Gateways and our current strategic plan. From that site, you can also learn about our annual competitive grants, and you can go to Visit Chesapeake Gateways to see the listings of the many core network partner sites. Next slide. Great.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah. So the best way to describe our technical assistance is to really think of it as people power, where it's people power for defined projects versus funding. So we bring expertise, facilitation, and knowledge. And if the NPS Annapolis office doesn't have the needed expertise in-house, we partner with others to bring support to the Chesapeake watershed places and programmatic partners. The example we're sharing today is with the Department of Transportation Volpe Center. Nationally, NPS partners with the DOT Volpe Center on transportation, multimodal, and equitable access projects all across the country. And for the past several years, we have been observing similar transportation and access needs voiced by partners from across the watershed. So a few years ago, NPS Chesapeake Gateways office set up what's known as an interagency agreement between the Volpe office and our office to be able to provide transportation and access expertise and consultations for our Chesapeake watershed partners. And so at the request of the city of Annapolis, Volpe started on a project to create a water access plan for Annapolis. That was sort of our first project under our new interagency agreement. And being in the Annapolis area allowed Volpe to provide some limited consultation support for a few others, including a request for assistance from the Brandywine Foundation. This resulted in the Rapid Access Assessment Report that Volpe will review this morning. The report represents the conclusion of the technical assistance to the Brandywine Foundation from the NPS Chesapeake Gateways and Volpe Center. We now have created a competitive application process for Volpe technical assistance. And our first round resulted in half a dozen additional projects that Volpe will be doing consultations and projects for gateway partners across DC, Maryland, and Virginia that'll be starting later this fall. So I really want to thank the Volpe team for their incredible work and the partnership with NPS Chesapeake Gateway. So I'll turn it back now to Katie and Dan.
Thank you, Wendy. I turned off my video since you would be looking at my profile since the screen is on the other monitor. But yeah, so just a very brief introduction of the U.S. Department of Transportation Volpe Center. We were established by the U.S. Department of Transportation in 1970 to serve as a federal resource positioned to provide multidisciplinary and multimodal transportation expertise on behalf of DOT to all of DOT's operating administrations, which means all of the different modes of transportation, as well as the Office of the Secretary, which is the directorate we're located within, and other federal agencies like the Park Service, and state and local governments, academia, and industry. So as mentioned, and as Wendy mentioned too, in addition to DOT, we work with a lot of other federal agencies as well as state and local governments, and we perform our work through interagency agreements like Wendy mentioned as well. We have about 500 federal staff at the Volpe Center and touch every mode and topic in transportation. And the work that we're doing, or that we did do for the Brandywine Foundation through our interagency agreement with the Park Service, was in the area of multimodal systems research. So to jump in on the Whitehall Site Transportation Assistance Group, or TAG study, the purpose of the Whitehall Transportation Assistance Group study was to provide general observations and potential actions or alternatives for the Brandywine Foundation to consider related to transportation and access to and within the Whitehall property through a rapid transportation assessment. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means in a minute. Many factors were considered as part of the study, and chief among these was considering the neighborhood and community character and wanting to avoid any traffic disruption and other adverse impacts. As such, the overall focus of this study was primarily on challenges and opportunities related to water-based access to the site. Land-based access was investigated and considered as a limited option, such as for those with accessibility needs. And just to reiterate, we have the point there, as Wendy's mentioned a few times, that this study was completely independent of the CNRA proposal. So for the approach for this rapid assessment, it's a replicable process that we've done for a lot of other sites and different public lands agencies and others. It centers around a site visit. So we had the site visit in the fall of 2022, so almost a year ago now. We've received some background information and reports from the Brandywine Foundation and Park Service on the site itself that we thought could be useful, or they thought could be useful for the study. During the site visit, Volpe walked the site and took a tour by boat of the coastline. State and county historic and cultural resource agency representatives also joined us on the site visit to provide some context and answer questions about the easements, restrictions, and historic and cultural value of the site. On the last day of the site visit, Volpe facilitated a discussion around the findings from the field investigations and recommended next steps coming out of it and documentation of the report. The observations and discussions were then documented in a final report, which was reviewed with the Park Service and Brandywine Foundation before Volpe finalized that report. And just to summarize, just to give a high-level overview, there are four main sections within the Volpe study. The introduction summarizes the project purpose and approach, which I just reviewed for you. The background and conditions section summarizes current site conditions, historical ownership and uses, and relevant and concurrent planning activities, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. It also has a section on transportation access issues and challenges, summarizing both the water-based and land-based challenges for accessing the site. And then lastly, there is a site access strategy section that summarizes different options for establishing public benefit of the site and access to the site, focusing primarily on strategically improving water-based access. So on the next few slides, I'm just going to provide a high-level summary of the findings that are documented in the report. So the 115-acre Whitehall site is currently developed with an estate house constructed in 1764 by Governor Sharp. I think you're all pretty familiar with the site itself. The manor house is registered as a National Historic Landmark and was the first property in the state of Maryland to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In addition to the estate house, there are several outbuildings and 3 other homes, including a home for the caretaker of the property, a short-term rental, as Charlie mentioned, and a cottage house that is currently uninhabited and in disrepair, which the Scarlett family wishes to retain. It's also important to note that the property is under an easement with the National Trust of Historic Preservation, limiting development of the property. Despite being located on a peninsula with, there are also barns, fields, and a trail system used for horse boarding and training on the property. And since 2016, as Charlie mentioned, and I think you're all familiar, the foundation has also used the property as a wedding and events venue, hosting approximately 12 events per year. And these are just some images of the outdoor landscape at the site. So despite being located on a peninsula with coastline on 3 sides, the property does not have water access for use during private events or for use by the public currently. There are 2 existing private wooden docks, which you can see here in these images. The dock on the southeast corner of the property along Meredith Creek, which formerly served the cottage, is in a state of disrepair and is not usable currently. The other dock along Meredith Creek is for private use of the property caretaker. Although there is no current dock on the Whitehall Creek side, guests of Governor Sharp were known to have arrived by boat, and historic maps and documents also show that there was a likely historically a working dock on Whitehall Creek that was used by paid and enslaved servants at that time. The report goes into a lot more detail, and I know you're all very familiar with the site itself, but the report does go into a lot more detail on the history, which we are focusing in today based on, just to save some time. So the report also gets into some challenges related to water-based access of the site. There are several significant challenges to providing strategic water-based public access. First, coastline stabilization is a major challenge for water-based access and to retaining the site's historic, cultural, and natural resources. Sections of Whitehall's 1.7 miles of coastline are experiencing erosion at a very high rate, which are creating unstable property banks and adding sediment to Whitehall Creek, Meredith Creek, and the Chesapeake Bay. On the south end of the property, there's a seawall comprised of concrete as well as erosion control fabric with riprap. The seawall is functional but has deferred maintenance, which is a concern. Coastline stabilization through erosion control and completing that deferred maintenance is necessary in order to protect the shoreline against erosion and to ensure the conservation, preservation, and resiliency of the historic Whitehall property. Second on the slide here, current dock infrastructure at the site is not suitable for a public ferry system at this time. However, there are opportunities to repair or rehabilitate dock infrastructure at the site for this need. There are also not currently any formalized water access opportunities for public kayaks or other non-motorized watercraft. And lastly, on the slide, the site maintains a network of trails that offer scenic, recreational, and water access opportunities. However, there are not currently any accessible trails for public access from the property shoreline to those key locations on site. In addition to the water-based access challenges, of course, there are land-based access challenges that the study also summarizes. First, of course, traffic congestion is the primary challenge. Route 50, which for most visitors would be a required route to access Whitehall Road and the Whitehall site, can be heavily congested due to traffic at the Bay Bridge. Although visitation to the Whitehall site would be limited to a level that would not significantly impact the traffic itself, visitor experience for visitors that would be accessing the site would be impacted. Second, the entrance road, of course, although scenic, the current entrance road to the Whitehall site, Whitehall Road, and the driveway on the site itself are very narrow, often requiring vehicles to pull onto the driveway shoulder to let larger vehicles and trucks pass. In addition, Whitehall Road is protected through the Anne Arundel County Scenic and Historic Roads Program, and the Whitehall site is a National Historic Landmark with conservation easements, all of which limit changes that can be made. Parking is very limited on the property, and the creation of any new parking areas, even for just 15 vehicles, as is what is being considered in the study, would need to be balanced with preserving the historic, cultural, and natural resources on site. Although parking is currently provided for much more vehicles temporarily during private events such as weddings, the location of this temporary parking area is within the view shed and is not conducive for day visitor parking. Lastly, the network of trails on the Whitehall site is a scenic and recreational asset. However, signage and wayfinding improvements would be needed for proper public access. In addition, in order for public to access these trails, either additional parking or connectivity to a regional trails network or public transportation network would likely be needed. So moving on to future planning needs, in order to move forward with any infrastructure improvements at the site to provide strategic water-based public access and any limited land-based access, there are several additional studies and planning efforts that would be needed, primarily a phase 1 archaeological survey before any infrastructure improvements are put in place in order to expand public access at the site. This would be required in partnership with the county to identify and define any archaeological sites that exist on the property. Areas for assessment would include any sites identified as potential parking, improved trails, docks, and other watercraft access. Second, erosion is impacting the stability of the property shoreline and has the potential to directly impact archaeological sites and buildings on the property, which mentioned earlier. The Brandywine Foundation has previously worked with partners to develop a shoreline restoration concept plan. The concept plan could be further developed and implemented to ensure the conservation, preservation, and resiliency of the site. And lastly, and most importantly, is local community and public engagement. Purposeful local community and public engagement and consultation is needed for any of these future studies and planning. Community and public engagement provides the opportunity for meaningful communication between the Brandywine Foundation and the community, and allows for the community's ideas and concerns to be identified and incorporated into any decisions that ultimately affect them. There are also a lot of relevant and concurrent planning activities that impact any future of the Whitehall site. As you know, which has already been brought up a few times so far, the state of Maryland is in the planning stages of developing a new Chesapeake Bay crossing alongside the existing 2 crossings between Anne Arundel and Queen Anne's counties. Although the new Chesapeake Bay crossing project intends to eventually alleviate traffic congestion on Route 50 and may provide better access and connectivity for other modes such as bicycles and pedestrians, the construction of the crossing, which is expected to start somewhere in the next 3 to 5 years, will cause increased temporary congestion and limitations on those other modes. It's important to note here that the environmental impact study that's currently being conducted is a prime opportunity for the Broadneck community, for you all to make your wishes known with regard to transportation and traffic outcomes of this project. Regarding the Anne Arundel County Scenic and Historic Roads Program, Whitehall Road is a scenic and historic road and is subject to the Anne Arundel County regulations, which we described earlier, and that these these limit development along Whitehall Road and are designed specifically to preserve, maintain, and enhance the scenic and historic character of the landscape viewed from the road. The Broadneck Peninsula Trail project includes a planned section on the north side of US Route 50. This section does bring better bicycle and pedestrian access closer to the Whitehall site, but there is currently not a direct connection planned between that and Whitehall. Also, the Brandywine Foundation has applied for a grant under the Maryland Green Infrastructure Resilience Program for a living shoreline and restoration project located along Whitehall and Meredith Creeks. This site is within the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund high priority funding area and is explicitly designed to fulfill the state's Chesapeake Bay water quality goals while restoring those shorelines and increasing their resilience to climate impacts. So far, these grants have not been able to be awarded to the Brandywine Foundation because the site does not provide a direct public benefit. As discussed earlier, this study is completely independent of the CNRA proposal. However, as you all well know, the draft legislation for the CNRA proposal includes Whitehall within the boundary. Lastly, Visit Annapolis in Anne Arundel County has recently released an RFP for a feasibility study to explore the feasibility and economic impact of bringing back a Chesapeake Bay passenger ferry service. This initiative is not envisioned as a replacement for vehicular travel, but rather as a complementary way of travel. If realized, this ferry service could potentially support visitation to Whitehall, so it's considered relevant. So lastly, here, just wanted to summarize briefly. The study report concludes with a site access strategy that summarizes different options for strategically improving the public benefit of the site through primarily water-based public access and some very limited land-based access. In general, the Brandywine Foundation has a goal for identifying a long-term ownership and partnership model for longer-term operation, maintenance, and preservation of this site, as Charlie mentioned early on. This would require identifying a new steward for the property that could facilitate the future planning needs, as well as the specific infrastructure improvements that would be needed to provide strategic water-based public access and limited land-based access. For example, in the report, providing water-based public access, it noted in there, requires a series of different improvements, which are detailed in the report. For example, a new ferry dock, as mentioned earlier, would be needed to be funded, designed, and constructed. So the report does note different prioritized locations that could be and associated considerations related to that specific improvement, as well as, you know, some other options for improving access as well. So that is all we had today to provide a high-level overview. Wanted to try to leave 20 minutes for Q&A. It looks like we did that with a little bit of extra time too. So I will now pass it back over to Charlie to facilitate the Q&A. Charlie, are you still with us? You might be on mute.
I'm certainly here for questions, and Wendy and the Volpe team are here for any questions that anybody might have. This is Pat's meeting as opposed to mine, so
Okay.
Pat, I'll
Sorry
let you
about that.
run the Q&A.
Okay. Raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
Here's
All right, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And thanks, Charlie and Wendy. So a couple things. I know when this meeting invite came out, it wasn't saying that it was going to be about the Volpe rapid assessment. And so I think a lot of people chatting here on the line are a little surprised that CNRA was off the table. Wendy, that you took that off the table at the beginning. So I would just recommend that in future agendas, we get specific, because this was the middle of a workday with very little notification. And we are, as a group of citizens, trying to understand what's actually going on. So anyway, the second point is regarding your not being involved and the Park Service not getting involved. That comes as a huge surprise to me, and I'm part of a very large residents group who is represented by over 1,700 people signing a petition. And you know, my concern is that if you haven't been involved, that's not what's being said at all anywhere. As a matter of fact, very publicly, other community groups have stated factually that Charlie and you are talking regularly in final negotiation stages. So it's kind of hard to believe that the legislation is about to be introduced and voted on, and we're hearing that the Park Service is having their first community event, but you've not been involved, and we're not going to talk about it today. So how do you square up? I mean, are you and Charlie involved in negotiations? Because it's been put out in writing and publicly said many times that you are in active negotiations and everybody's happy with those negotiations. And part of the emotion from the citizens group is, if you are, can we please understand what that looks like? We could be taking a lot of stuff off the table. So I'll pause there, Wendy, for your reaction.
Now, let me interject something here first. First of all, I have put out numerous publications from the Broadneck Council that negotiations have not started. We thought they had initially also, but lately we found out from Charlie that no, they're waiting for the production of the Volpe study. Okay. Secondly, because of the need to get everybody together and understand where we're at, I called Charlie and said, how quickly can you get a meeting organized? It's summertime. I can't thank him and the National Park Service enough for giving me 2 dates that allowed them to jump in. We're going to have multiple meetings as this thing evolves. And I took the latest meeting that we could get, and they put it all together. Thirdly, I did not have an agenda from anybody. I just knew that representatives of the Volpe study group, as well as the National Park Service, were going to be here. So this is my first time to understand what the agenda actually is. And lastly, I got a lot out of this presentation. I am thrilled that Britt is recording it because I want to play it again. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Yeah, Andrew, I guess what I would say is from the NPS perspective, there is no negotiation because there is no CNRA. So no, there is not negotiation going on with any of the sites that are on the draft boundary.
Yeah, so I heard that today for the first time, and actually I have multiple in writing just a few weeks ago saying that everybody's happy with the negotiations and they're headed towards final stage. So thank you for clarifying that. And I think there should be an effort to put that out to everybody, because part of the concerns that we have, and then I'll stop and share with everybody else, is Whitehall is in the legislation now. And all of us are saying, well, what does that mean? There's no definition. And now we're hearing there's not even negotiations, even though it's been represented there are. So I think as a process that's backwards, which has been the whole contention of this, it's limited access. And this Volpe is not a study, as you know, it's a rapid assessment. We understand what it was. I've read all 20 pages, as have many people on this line. And so I think we're just saying, don't put a piece of property into the legislation without some questions and some involvement ongoing with the community.
And that's not something for the NPS to comment on, right? This is a congressional initiative. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I would ask Andrew to send me a copy of the email or the notice that you received that said the negotiations were complete. I'd appreciate that.
Sure, it's out on Nextdoor is the latest version that we had on it. It says it, but I'll be happy to pass it along to you.
I want to know who generated that note, because it certainly was not from the Broadneck Council. Anne, you're on mute. Anne, you're on, okay.
Good morning to all. I have a couple of things to say. One is we know something about Whitehall, and that is that my ancestors are buried there, 2 of them. And so I want to know what the archaeological assessment is going to entail. I've been over there digging myself, and there's the slave quarters at the adjoining property. Secondly, the stakeholders meeting that John Sarbanes talked about participated for 2 years, and Mr. Scarlett has met with his neighbors at Whitehall in April. Well, Whitehall is located in Skidmore, and descendants have been in this community for hundreds of years, yet we've not been at any meetings. So as we move forward, that needs to also be centered. We may not be stakeholders, but we really are in everything about this project, the Bay Bridge, and anything impacting us has an impact on our lives. So that needs to be remembered, that it was a former plantation where enslaved people toiled, and Indians, indigenous people, and indentured servants. So let's keep that a part of this project, which I don't hear in conversations. I need to get to the table. I don't want to be, but if there's going to be a conversation about where I live, where my mother lived, and her mother lived, and beyond, then I need to be at the table.
I appreciate that. The Volpe report identifies the need for future studies. And so the NPS is, through that report identifying what needs to be doing. It does not indicate that the NPS is doing any of those studies. The Anne Arundel County is engaged and has done some of the archaeological work there. And I know that they've been looking to identify and document the descendant communities in the area. Separate from sort of this Whitehall rapid assessment, the Park Service, the National Park Service has triggered standing in the large NEPA process for the Bay Bridge crossing. And so what that means is that we are an active member of the government agencies that are tracking that NEPA process. And the pieces related to the local communities, to heritage, to areas of national significance, we will be advocating for and making sure the assessments and under documentation are made through that Bay Crossing study. And we have already in that process identified that we expect the planners for that study to document the descendant communities on both sides of the bridge.
Danny?
Thanks, Pat. This is a question for Katie. Katie, this rapid study, is that a result of the original 2004 study that's been mentioned so many times in handouts and things, that the 2004 study really said we will have a study in the future, and there's never been a study? Is this rapid assessment the result of that 2004 study?
That's a good question. I am not sure. I'm not familiar with the 2004 study. Was that, can you provide more details, the title of the study, or maybe Charlie has some insight onto that study?
I see
What that
Wendy.
study is?
Wendy, can you answer that?
I'm not sure what you're referring to either. I'm sorry.
I can send everybody the link. Katie, I can send you the link and you can read it.
That'd be great. Okay, thank you.
Next
But-
question, Sally.
Well,
Yo,
just
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead.
this was not a result of the 2004 study. This was independent of that, since you didn't know what the 2004 study was. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's my
Okay.
understanding.
Next question, Sally Bryce O'Hara.
Thanks. I'm Sally Bryce O'Hara. I'm a resident adjacent to Whitehall. My family used to own Whitehall. My question for you, Wendy, is where are you in the process? I'm still unsure. I hear a lot about studies. At what point does the Park Service make a decision on whether Whitehall is entered into the Gateway program? And what are the criteria? How does that happen? We haven't heard anything about that process. My second question is for Katie, and that's whether or not you had any interaction with county or state officials on the prohibitions about development in critical areas, which would be where the ferry dock would go. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that question. So there, part of the Chesapeake Gateways program is beyond the community assistance we provide. There is a network of places that we help support and convene. And the link that was put in the chat earlier goes to our website, and you can open up, there's a document called the updated framework document for Chesapeake Gateways. In that document, there's a section that details out the characteristics to be a Chesapeake Gateway place. And there's, 6 different kinds of places: gateway sites, gateway communities, Chesapeake Gateway water access sites. For a Chesapeake Gateway site, the characteristics are sort of lined out. And as an office, we're setting up a process that we're hoping to launch by the end of the calendar year, maybe in the new calendar year, for places to do self-assessments where they look through those list of characteristics and indicate how they meet it or not. And I can just quickly give a sense of what some of those are. For a Chesapeake Gateway site, the defining characteristics are that they're located, within the Bay region or its tributaries, so sort of up the rivers, that they have dedicated focus on places which people are directed to access, experience, enjoy, learn about, and contribute to a particular Chesapeake-related natural, cultural, historical, or recreational resource, or if they might have an overall role to the Chesapeake story. They should be owned or managed by a public agency, a nonprofit, a tribe, or a private sector entity. Their primary purpose of the site management should be for conservation, interpretation, education, and/or recreation. The site should be open to the public visitation for regularly scheduled daily or weekly hours throughout the visitor season. And so that might be different for different places. And the site should have sufficient visitor information to support a listing on our website, which would include an overview of the site, the hours, if there's any fees, what activities or programs are there. So those are sort of the defining characteristics. So we're looking by the end of the year, in the new year, for places that want to join the network, that they would go through a process to sort of self-identify how they meet all those characteristics. And
Okay, so it sounds like
where
there's
we
still.
are in the process is because we don't have that self-selection form ready to go yet. We're Brandywine Foundation, or really other places, we would be looking to begin that in the new calendar year.
And does that process include the local community and public input?
The individual sites are who would be seeking to apply. They would have to meet all those characteristics. And that is their intention is that they would already be, in essence, sort of up and running. And so if there were steps to engage the community in the process of when there's public access to the site, that would happen prior to seeking to be a member of the network.
By characteristics, do you mean criterion?
Well, characteristics are like the defining features of a site, so we're trying not to create a scenario where I think they're interchangeable words. So yeah, criteria for inclusion as a network, core networks place within the network.
Sally, did you have more to ask?
I just had the question that I sent over in Katie's direction about dealing with county and state authorities on critical area.
Yeah, and I'll try to be really brief since I see more hands up and we only have about 5 minutes left, but I will just say the options that are all in, that is one of the 3 options. I think the one that you're referring to for the different dock locations. We did walk the site with historic and cultural resource staff at the county and state level, as well as other staff, but the they're listed as options, and in order to be able to really identify permitting requirements and other specifications for the sites, and that would be the follow-on studies that were referenced there. So no.
Thank you.
All right, Rory.
Morning, everybody. My name is Rory Nolan. I'm the Chief of Staff for Delegate Bagnall. I just want to say, she apologizes that she couldn't make it, but we're here taking notes and hearing everybody's concerns. I want to start by just a comment, and that it seems like there's still a lot of outstanding confusion with what, stipulates Whitehall's involvement in CNRA and who the stakeholders are and those kind of things. I'd have to run this by Heather, but I'm sure we would be willing to work with our federal partners to make sure that we have adequate information and correct information, because to Andrew's point, it seems like there's a lot of conflicting information currently being shared across the community for what's happening with the site. Our office did have a couple of questions. So first of all, this is the first time that we actually heard of the Volpe report on our end. Wendy, is there a place that we can access that, just so we can give that a full read through?
I think Charlie has, the report has been provided to Charlie. So so if Charlie can share that.
Yeah, I can share. I can send that to Heather. I don't know your email, Rory, but I've got Heather's.
Yeah. Oh, okay. If you have Heather's, we'll be able to see that. So thank you. And the second thing that we wanted to ask, I know that you're not particularly, directly involved with stakeholders of the CNRA legislation, but do we know if this report has been made available and advertised to them? Just for their information as they're still discussing the legislation?
That would be whether Charlie forwarded that on or not.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's all we have for now. Like I said, our email is always open for comments. I'll drop them in the chat as well. And I'm also going to ask, I guess one more question that I have for, Wendy and everybody else on the call, because I know we're not going to be able to get to all the questions in the chat, which I would ask you to be cognizant of as well. Is there an avenue for people who still have outstanding questions about what happened during this meeting to reach out to NPS Chesapeake Gateways? Is there a contact that you'd be able to share in the chat for people to reach out to?
Yeah, we have an info line. I'll ask Brent or Eddie to send our our info email to put that in. There is one question I saw in the chat that I'll just address real quick. It was a question from, it said Stephen Brook, about that this technical assistance was provided to Brandywine. If there were a commercial developer looking to develop a site on the bay, could they also receive assistance from Volpe? So because the National Park Service Chesapeake Gateways Office is a community assistance program, in our original legislation from 1998, it does give us authority to provide technical or financial assistance to federal, state, local communities, nonprofits, and then there's a phrase that says, and the private sector. So we actually do have very broad authority to support beyond sort of the traditional nonprofit or government public entities. And so when we start the process to do our competitive technical assistance, we already did a round for Volpe, so we're sort of booked up for the coming year. But when our next technical assistance offering comes up for Volpe technical assistance under Chesapeake Gateways, yes, private sector entities could competitively apply for that assistance.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks.
Yeah, I will ask Britt Griswold, he's the Director of Communications to the Broadneck Council, to post the Volpe report on the Broadneck website, and we'll get that information out to all of you.
Will do.
Okay.
And I would ask, I see there's questions for me in the chat, and once we hang up, I won't have access to the chat. Is there some way I can get a copy of those questions so that I can respond?
Britt, are you there?
Yes, I believe we can capture the chat and pass it on.
That would be great, Britt. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, and Charlie, if you want to send me another copy of the Volpe report, I know many on this call have already read it, but I just want to be sure that I have it I'm having problems with my personal computer, so I just want to be sure I have it ready to post. Okay,
Sure,
thank you. We're about out of time, and I cannot thank the folks who came and spoke in response to our need to understand more about this operation. The Broadneck Council has hosted now 3 community meetings just on this subject. We're learning a little bit as we go along, and because there has not been a final negotiation or even a mid-range negotiation between the National Park Service and Brandywine, information is not available. It's just not there, as I have shared with you. So we will conclude this session, and we will come back to you when we have more knowledge to share with you. And thank Charlie for being on the call with us, Wendy and Katie, and everybody else who participated. And we will just hope that we can work together and come to a satisfactory solution that benefits both the residents of the Broadneck Peninsula as well as the beautiful historic Whitehall mansion.
Pat, can I make one just comment? And that is that
I'm sorry, I don't know who's speaking.
This is Fraser. It's just, if we could make a really concerted effort, and this is for everybody, particularly on the federal side, whether intended or unintended, there's the sense by many in the community that this whole situation feels gerrymandered. And
Could you explain what you mean? I mean, I know what the word
because of
means.
a lack of, okay, just a second, Pat, please. Go
ahead.
Because of a lack of awareness or communication, or just sort of fractured, or like in the case of Anne, who was sort of articulating that her family has hundreds of years of history here, but has had no involvement in anything. I would just encourage you on the federal side to recognize, and to Charlie to recognize, that there's some extreme disconnect with parts of the community that are viable parts of this discussion. And I just want to make sure that everybody's doing everything they can and beyond to not stake out their positions for or against necessarily, but to be overly inclusive. That's all I'm asking.
I hope.
Fraser,
I
I'd
hope-
like to
No,
respond.
excuse me. I want to finish my sentence. I hope everybody on this call sends a note or an email to your elected officials, because what they did in starting this project and drafting this legislation without consulting any of us, it is unacceptable. And I know I've written my letters. I hope everybody else on this call has also, because that's where it all started. Who wanted to speak? There was one other person.
That was me, Pat. This is Charlie.
Charlie,
Just wanted
go.
to Fraser, we're property owners, and we're doing what we feel we need to do. We're not experts on community outreach or public relations. Since I found out there was concern in the community, I have had probably 10 meetings, maybe more, and certainly 100 conversations on the subject. I've tried to be as transparent as I could possibly be. Back in April, we held this meeting, and I think there were probably 15 or 20 people that attended on a Zoom call, and brought all this information out, answered any questions that were there. There are a lot of people out there, obviously, because I think there are 86 people on this conversation this morning. A lot of people who didn't attend that meeting. There has been a lot of misinformation out there. I think I've been consistent in what I have said throughout the process. I try to be open and transparent, and I understand your concern, Fraser, and I apologize if you have, or I'm sorry that if you haven't, been included in all the conversations. It's developed kind of and it's taken on its own life, and it hasn't been planned. I think Pat makes a very good point that the legislation kind of came out and surprised everybody. And particularly the way it was presented, and it would be fear producing for me too if I were a neighbor on Whitehall Road. But it's never been our intention. We're highly interested in preserving the character of Whitehall and Whitehall Road and the surrounding community. And we've been working toward that end throughout the whole thing. And I've been delighted to work with Pat. I've had conversations with Andrew and Sally and a number of others. I participated in the meetings with Congressman Sarbanes. And, I've said from the outset that I think we are all on the same page here. I think our goals are all the same. I don't think there's anybody out there that resents our efforts to try to preserve and interpret and share Whitehall. You want it done on a controlled basis, and so do we.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate the thoughtful remarks. I think I fully grasp the complexity and the dynamic that everybody's kind of up against, and I don't claim to even have a fraction, of the knowledge about what the dynamic is for you, family, and within the Brandywine Foundation. I just know from this perspective, what the sense was and what I was hoping for. And I'll also say that when asked in public forum to proceed strictly in regular order on any legislation moving forward, many of you on the call were probably there, and many of you know. And Wendy, for your edification, Congressman Sarbanes declined to agree to adhere to regular order, which is a little bit telling, and it's a little bit alarming in the community, because what that means is, because Chris Van Hollen sits on appropriations and has a tremendous amount of authority over everyone's life on the federal side of the ledger, that he'll have a seat at the table in an omnibus negotiated scenario. There will be no hearings, there will be no anything. It will just be whether or not somebody cares about this horse trade situation. And so for everybody, involved, we should be impressing upon Senator Van Hollen and Representative Sarbanes that regular order in this, no matter what, has to be the standard, because anything short of that would shortcut the community and undermine everything that would be stand up and reputable about the whole process.
I just wanted to mention also that I have invited Senator Van Hollen to attend a Broadneck Council meeting if he will agree. He's difficult to schedule, but I'm chasing him. At the Sarbanes meeting, we had over 200 attendees, and that was a very we had a terrific response to that. So keep watching our Broadneck website, and Britt will be posting as much material as we can get to you. And I would also ask Wendy and Katie, if you can send me just an email with the websites or the email addresses that you had posted. One went up towards the beginning of the meeting, but it went down so quickly I wasn't able to write it down. So if you post that to me, I will get it up on our Broadneck Council website also. Okay, with that, I think we will conclude. And I thank you for your attendance. We had 87 people on this call during prime time, and that was a wonderful response, and I appreciate everybody who came. Thank you. And
Thank you,
thanks.
Pat. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Charlie.
Bye-bye.